Days passed and life with Jungkook grew more suffocating. He didn't soften, he wasn't the type to. Though he sometimes tried to speak to you, you made sure to ignore him. You refused to give him the satisfaction of your attention. But you weren't just sitting around. Every moment you planned, you schemed, you waited. One day you would find a way out of this gilded cage, no matter how impossible it seemed right now. But today you had taken a bigger risk than ever before. Earlier, you had overheard a conversation between Jungkook and one of his men about an important shipment, a deal that was pivotal to his business. You knew enough about his world to understand that this was no small matter. You had tampered with the details, sending false information to the receiving party through one of his devices. It was reckless, but you hoped it would disrupt his plans enough to buy you a chance to escape. Now you were sitting in the living room, every muscle in your body tense, waiting for the fallout. You knew the storm was coming, and then you heard it. Heavy footsteps, loud and deliberate, growing closer with every passing second. The door burst open with a force that made you flinch, and then he stood, his expression storm of anger. Jungkook's dark eyes focused on you, and you felt the heavy force of his anger. He didn't speak at first, but his presence made the air feel heavy and tense. He walked towards you, his steps quick and firm like a hunter closing in on its target. You really think you're clever, don't you? His voice was low, deadly calm, and that terrified you more than if he had shouted. You forced yourself to meet his gaze, though your heart raced in your chest, but you didn't say a word, making him lose his mind. Jungkook's jaw tightened as he pulled out his phone and tossed it onto the table in front of you. On the screen were messages, the ones you had sent. What were you trying to do, huh? Your blood ran cold. He knew, of course, he knew. Do you have any idea what you have done? His voice rose slightly, the edge of his anger cutting through his words. You have put years of work on the line. That deal was everything, and you decided to play game with it. You swallowed hard, trying to maintain your composure. Maybe if your deal is so important, you shouldn't leave your things lying around. You said firmly, though your voice shook a little. Jungkook straightened, letting out a bitter laugh. You are trying to provoke me. You think if you push hard enough, I'll let you go? You think you are smarter than me? You didn't respond, but your silence was an answer in itself. You have underestimated me. This isn't a game you can win, Ryan. I know exactly what you're trying to do, and let me make one thing clear. There is no escape from this. His words sent a chill down your spine, but you refused to back down. You can't keep me here forever. You may have trapped me now, but I'll find a way out. Jungkook's expression darkened further, and for a moment you thought he might lose control, but instead he stepped back, his gaze never leaving yours. Try if you want, but every time you try to run, I'll bring you back, and the next time you pull a stunt like this, there will be consequences. With that, he turned and left the room, but his presence felt like it still hung in the air. You sat there, your thoughts spinning. Jungkook's anger was scary, but his words only made you more determined. You would find a way to escape, no matter what it took. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between you and Jungkook only grew. You continued to test his patience, determined to make him give up on this forced marriage, but Jungkook wasn't the type to back down. His presence was like a shadow, always around, always watching. It felt impossible to escape, but you never stopped planning. The tension between you and Jungkook had been building all day, and you decided to push him. Maybe, just maybe, if you frustrated him enough, he would snap and leave you alone. You were standing in your shared bedroom, leaning casual against the vanity, arms crossed as you watched him. You can't control everything, you know. Not me, not your life, not your enemies. You're not as untouchable as you think. Jungkook, who had been rolling up his sleeves, stopped. He turned to face you, his eyes dark and unreadable. What did you just say? His voice was calm, but you could sense the anger rising beneath. You shrugged, trying to seem unaffected. You heard me. You act like you own the world, but deep down you are just scared. Scared that one day all your control will slip away. Without warning, he was right in front of you. One moment he was by the dresser, and the next he was inches away, his body towering over you. His hand slammed onto the vanity, trapping you as he leaned in closer. You froze, your confidence slipping as his face came dangerously close. His dark eyes locked onto yours, and the air around you felt thick, charged with something you couldn't ignore. Say that again, he murmured, his voice a dangerous whisper. You tried to speak, but the word got stuck in your throat. Your heart raced, and his presence overwhelmed you. The heat from his body, the scent of his cologne, his breath on your skin. You leaned back instinctively, but there was no space to move. His smirk deepened as he noticed your reaction. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? I'm not afraid of you. You whispered, but the tremble in your voice gave you away. His smirk grew wider as his hand reached up, brushing a strand of hair from your face. The touch was gentle, but it made your pulse race. Do you really think I care about your little games? You think you can push me to the edge and I won't do anything? Let me make this clear, sweetheart. His hand reached out, curling around your waist with a firm grip, pulling you closer so you were forced to look into his eyes. If I wanted to, I could make you beg for it. But don't worry, he added, his lips barely brushing against your cheek. I'm in no rush. Your breath hitched, your heart racing in your chest. You knew that tone, knew that look, the combination of control and something far darker than you didn't want to acknowledge. You tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, holding you in place. You think I don't see the way you look at me, Ryan? You don't want to be here, you don't want me, but deep down, you know no matter how much you fight me, you'll always be mine. And when I decide to claim you, no one, not even you, will stop me. His face was inches from yours now, his eyes locked onto yours as if he could see straight into your soul. You felt like you couldn't breathe, like your chest was tightening with every word he said. His lips parted slightly, just enough for you to catch the dark promise in his gaze. If I wanted to take you right now, there's nothing you could do to stop me, and when I'm finished, you'll remember who owns you. Your mouth went dry, your mind racing to form a response, but the fear of what might come next silenced you completely. His words weren't just threats, they were promises of things you had no power to control. But just as you thought he might kiss you, take you in the way his voice suggested, he let go of your wrist, stepping back with a smirk. But, he said, his voice now playful yet cold, I'm not in the mood to deal with you tonight, but don't forget, sweetheart, one day you won't be able to run, and then we'll see how much you really resist me. With that, he turned, walking away as though nothing had happened, leaving you breathless and speechless. The door clicked shut behind him, but the feeling of his words, the weight of them, lingered in the room, suffocating as you stood frozen, your heart still racing. You hadn't won, not this time. Jungkook had proven to you once again that when he wanted something, nothing could stand in his way. Even after his warning, the next evening your chance came. Jungkook had left the mansion to deal with business, and the guards seemed distracted. You slipped out unnoticed, your heart racing as you ran into the dark streets, but freedom wasn't waiting for you. Danger was. You had barely made it 3 blocks before the screech of tires shattered the silence of that night. A black van cut you off, and before you could react, masked man jumped out, grabbing you with brute force. Let go of me, you screamed, thrashing against their hold, but it was no use. One of men chuckled darkly. Fiercely, aren't you? Too bad your husband didn't teach you to behave. Panic surged through you. These weren't ordinary thugs. They were from a rival gang who wanted to destroy both Jungkook and your father, and you knew exactly why they had come for you. When the van stopped, you were dragged into an abandoned warehouse. The leader of the gang, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. Well, well, he drawled, circling you like a predator. Jungkook's little bride. Bet he didn't think we'd find you so easily. You glared at him, masking your fear with defiance. I'm nothing to him. You're wasting your time. The leader laughed, his voice echoing through the room. Oh, sweetheart, you're worth more than you think. Let's see how far Jungkook will go to get you back. Despite your brave front, dread settled in your stomach. Hours passed in suffocating silence. You were tied to a chair, your wrists aching from the tight ropes. The gang members lounged around, laughing and drinking, their eyes occasionally drifting to you. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire erupted outside. Shouts and chaos followed as heavy footsteps approached the warehouse. The door burst open and Jungkook strode in, his expression colder than you had ever seen. Dressed in all black, his presence was like death itself. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on you, something flickered in them, relief quickly masked by rage. Ah, the great John Jungkook. The gang leader sneered, dragging the knife slightly against your neck for emphasis. You winced, but Jungkook didn't flinch. Finally here to save your precious wife. You are late. Jungkook's hands were shoved into his pockets, his expression as indifferent as stone. Let her go. You're playing a game you can't win. His voice was dangerously low, sending chills down your spine. The leader let out a boisterous laugh, tightening his grip on your hair. Can't win? Look at you, Jungkook. You might be a king in your world, but here, you are nothing. I hold the cards now. He pulled you closer, his knife pressing harder against your skin. If you want her alive, you'll have to prove it. Kneel. Your breath hissed and you turned your head to look at Jungkook. Fear clenched your chest. John Jungkook kneel? Impossible. This was the man who had built an empire on ruthlessness and dominance. He had never bowed to anyone, not to his enemies, not even to his own family. The idea of him kneeling was laughable. You shook your head subtly, your eyes pleading with him. Don't. He won't do it. You told yourself he can't, but Jungkook just stood there, his hands were still in his pockets, his gaze never leaving you. The room was heavy with silence, everyone waiting to see what the infamous mafia boss would do. The leader grinned, his confidence started growing. What's the matter, Jungkook? Too proud? I thought you cared about her, or maybe she's just not worth it. Jungkook's jaw tightened, the faintest twitch in his expression betrayed the storm shimmering beneath his cold exterior. Then, to everyone's shock, he moved. Slowly he dropped to one knee, gasp filled the room, yours the loudest. Your heart stopped as you watched him lower himself to the ground, his dark head bowing slightly. The sight was surreal, almost unreal. John Jungkook, the man who had always stood taller than anyone in every room, was on his knees for you. Your voice cracked as you whispered, Jungkook, don't. The leader's laugh boomed, echoing off the walls. Look at you, the great John Jungkook brought to his knees for a woman. I didn't think you had it in you. Jungkook looked up, his gaze deadly calm, and the laughter died in the leader's throat. Enjoy this moment because it will be your last. The leader faltered and his grip on you loosened for just a second, and that was all Jungkook needed. Like a switch had flipped, Jungkook surged forward. He moved faster than anyone could react, disarming the leader in a heartbeat. His hand shot out, gripping the man's throat and slamming him against the wall with bone-shattering force. You gasped as you watched him, his expression no longer calm but pure fury. You made one mistake. You touched what's mine. The leader gasped for air, clawing at Jungkook's unyielding grip, but there was no escape. Jungkook tossed him to the ground like a rag doll, and his men swarmed in to finish the job. Jungkook turned back to you, his face still hard with anger, but his movements softened as he knelt in front of you, not in submission but in concern. His hands were gentle as he untied the ropes binding your wrists. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice quieter now, though the intensity in his eyes hadn't faded. You stared at him, too shocked to speak. The picture of him kneeling stayed in your mind, and you couldn't match it with the man in front of you. This was John Jungkook, the cold mafia boss who never bowed to anyone, yet he had done it for you. He looked up and your eyes met for a second before he stood up. holding your hand. Let's go. You stood but couldn't erase the image of him kneeling in front of you, his enemies just to save you. It wasn't a small thing. If he had done that, it means you're not just a part of a game anymore. You knelt for me? You whispered, still unable to believe what you had seen. Jungkook's jaw tightened. I wasn't going to lose you. Back at the mansion, the air between you and Jungkook was heavy with silence. You were sitting on the edge of the bed, your hands gripping the blanket tightly as your mind replayed every moment of what had happened. The way he knelt, the look in his eyes, it didn't make sense. Across the room, Jungkook was standing near the window, staring out into the night. The soft glow of the moon outlined his figure, making him seem even more distant. He hadn't said a word since bringing you back, and the quiet was unbearable. You couldn't hold it in any longer. Why? Jungkook turned to face you, his expression calm but unreadable. Why what? You hesitated, your heart was racing. Why did you kneel? You have never done that for anyone, ever. His jaw tightened and he looked at you for a moment before answering. I told you, losing you wasn't an option. His words hit you harder than you expected. You stared at him, your chest tightened as you tried to process what he had just said. This was Jungkook, the cold, ruthless man who never showed weakness, and yet tonight he had broken his own rules. Why would it matter if you lost me? You asked softly, your voice barely above a whisper. He walked closer, his steps slow and deliberate. Because, he said, his eyes locking onto yours, you matter to me more than you realize. For the first time, you saw something in him that you hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. It was subtle, hidden behind the usual stoic expression, but it was there. You looked away, your emotion a mix of confusion and something you didn't want to name. I don't understand you, Jungkook. He let out a soft sigh and knelt in front of you, gently taking your hands in his. His touch was warm, careful, almost hesitant. You don't have to understand everything right now, but I need you to know one thing. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, always. His words hung in the air, and for the first time you didn't see him as just the heartless man who had forced you into this situation. There was something deeper, something real, and it scared you because a part of you wanted to believe him. The room was heavy with silence, but the question you had been holding back for so long finally escaped. Why me? You asked, your voice trembled slightly. Why does it matter? He said, looking at you. The look was completely foreign. He seems like a different Jungkook who once emotionless eyes were full of emotions. You clenched your fist. It matters because I don't understand. You had no reason to choose me. You barely knew me and you hesitated, the words caught in your throat. You could have had her. He held your hands in his and you didn't know why you were letting him touch you, hold you. It was clear that you also started to fall for him because unlike your father, he wasn't heartless for people he loved. He didn't think twice before kneeling down in front of his enemy just for you. He put you above his reputation, above his name. She's gone, he said finally, his voice quieter now. I know, but if she were alive, you would have chosen her, wouldn't you? No, he said firmly, the word cutting through the silence like a knife. You blinked, startled by the intensity of his response. Your sister, she was kind, gentle, everything people would expect a wife to be, but she wasn't you. You stared at him, confusion and disbelief warring within you. What's that supposed to mean? It means that I didn't want someone perfect. I didn't want someone who would agree with me just to keep the peace. I wanted someone who could stand up to me, challenge me, make me question everything I thought I knew. And that's you. From the moment I met you, you have been a thorn in my side. You're stubborn, infuriating, and completely unwilling to bend to anyone's will, not even mine, and I can't ignore that. I won't ignore that. You shook your head overwhelmed. I don't understand. You barely knew me when you decided this. Jungkook straightened, his expression softening, though his tone remained firm. I knew enough. I saw someone who wasn't afraid to fight for what she wanted, even when the odds were against her. I saw someone who wouldn't just survive in this world, but thrive in it. I saw someone who reminded me what it means to feel alive. Your breath hitched, his words hitting you harder than you expected. But my sister, she was better than me in every way. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently tilt your chin up so you couldn't look away. No, she was good, yes, but you're stronger. You have fire in you, and that's what I need. Tears pricked at the corners of your eyes, though you refused to let them fall. I don't know if I can live up to what you expect. You whispered, you already have. Jungkook replied, his gaze was unwavering. You pulled back slightly, shaking your head. But I don't even like you. A faint smirk tugged at his lips, though his eyes remained serious. That's okay. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to give this a chance. And if I don't? You challenged, just to make sure he wasn't making empty promises. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. Then I'll keep trying, because I don't give up on what I want, and I want you. Your heart pounded in your chest, the weight of his words settling over you. For so long you had thought of Jungkook as nothing more than a cold, calculating man who saw you as a pawn in his game. But now you weren't so sure. The vulnerability in his eyes, the determination in his voice, it was something you hadn't expected, and as much as you wanted to push him away, a small part of you couldn't ignore the sincerity behind his words. Maybe, just maybe there was more to Jungkook than you had thought, and maybe, just maybe you weren't as indifferent to him as you pretend to be. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some grand epiphany or a single moment that made you realize you were falling for him. Instead, it was the small things, the way Jungkook always noticed when you were upset, even when you didn't say a word. The way he made sure you had breakfast every morning, even if it meant waking up earlier than usual. The way he looked at you like you were the only person in the room, even when a dozen others were vying for his attention. At first, you brushed it off. You told yourself it didn't matter, that he was just playing some long game to win you over, but the cracks in your defenses started to show. Months later, you found yourselves standing on the balcony of the mansion. The air was cool, the night quiet, and for the first time in what felt like forever, you felt at peace. Jungkook was standing beside you, his hand resting lightly on yours. He didn't say anything at first, just gazed out at the view with a small, content smile on his face. Do you ever regret it? You asked, suddenly breaking the silence. He turned to look at you, furrowing his brows. Regret what? Choosing me, bringing me into this world. Jungkook's grip on your hand tightened and he stepped closer, his other hand cupping your cheek and guiding your face towards him. Not for a second. You have given me something I never thought I'd have, Fayan. A reason to fight, a reason to live. Tears welled in your eyes and you tried to look away but he wouldn't let you. This life was completely different from what you had with your father. Jungkook wasn't controlling. Despite of being a short-tempered man, he ignored every silly or major mistake you made to harm him. You are my everything. I didn't know what love was until you showed me. You are the one thing I got right in a world full of wrongs. The tears spilled over and you reached up, your hand resting on his, and he held your face. You are not as heartless as you think you are. He let out a shaky laugh, his forehead pressing against yours. Only because of you. You changed everything, Ryan, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. You leaned into him, your lips brushing against his in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. In that moment, surrounded by the ocean and the quiet hum of the night, you knew that despite the chaos and pain that had brought you here, this was where you were meant to be, with him always.